Katie Bates Clark is opening up about one of the most painful chapters of her life, revealing that childhood trauma ultimately led to the loss of nearly 90% of her family relationships. Her emotional comments have sparked conversations among fans, who were shocked to learn just how much she has endured behind the scenes. While many people know Katie for the life she shares publicly today, she says there is a much deeper story that has shaped the person she has become. According to Katie, the challenges began during her childhood. Although family is often seen as a source of comfort and stability, she explained that her early years were marked by experiences that left lasting emotional scars. Those experiences did not simply disappear as she grew older. Instead, they followed her into adulthood, affecting how she viewed relationships, trust, and even her sense of belonging. As time passed, Katie found herself facing difficult choices. She explained that healing from trauma sometimes requires setting boundaries, even when those boundaries involve people you love. For many survivors, deciding to step away from unhealthy relationships can be one of the hardest decisions imaginable. Katie suggested that this was exactly the situation she found herself in. The result was heartbreaking. She revealed that she lost contact with approximately 90% of her family relationships. That number immediately caught people's attention because it highlights just how extensive the separation became. Rather than being a disagreement with one or two relatives, it represented a dramatic change in nearly her entire family network. Katie admitted that the process was not easy. Walking away from familiar relationships often comes with feelings of guilt, sadness, and uncertainty. Even when a person knows they are making the right decision for their mental and emotional well-being, the loss can still feel overwhelming. She described moments of grief as she came to terms with the reality that many family connections would never be the same again. What makes her story particularly powerful is the fact that she is speaking about it openly. Discussions surrounding childhood trauma are often difficult because survivors may fear judgment or criticism. By sharing her experience, Katie hopes others who have faced similar struggles will understand that they are not alone. She also emphasized that healing is not a straight path. There were times when she questioned her decisions and wondered whether reconciliation might be possible. Yet she continued to focus on her personal growth, believing that protecting her emotional health had to remain a priority. As Katie reflected on her journey, she explained that losing family relationships did not happen overnight. Instead, it was the result of years of pain, unresolved issues, and difficult realizations. The gradual nature of the separation made it even more emotional, because each broken connection represented another reminder of what had been lost. Despite everything, Katie says she refuses to let her past define her future. She has worked hard to build a life centered on healing, resilience, and hope. While the trauma she experienced will always be part of her story, she believes it does not have to control the rest of her life. The revelation has left many people wondering what specific experiences led to such a dramatic family divide, and how Katie managed to move forward after losing so many important relationships. As Katie continued sharing her story, she explained that one of the most difficult parts of dealing with childhood trauma was recognizing how deeply it had affected her long after childhood ended. For years, she carried emotional wounds that were largely invisible to others. On the surface, life may have appeared normal, but internally she was struggling with memories, fears, and unresolved pain that continued to influence her relationships. She revealed that there came a point when she could no longer ignore the impact those experiences were having on her daily life. Many trauma survivors spend years trying to push painful memories aside.
Here's how I created my latest floral earrings. I love to look for inspiration in nature. I start by shaping
Hoping that time alone will heal everything. Katie suggested that she followed a similar path for a long time, attempting to move forward without fully confronting what had happened. Eventually, however, she realized that true healing required facing the past rather than running from it. That realization marked a turning point in her life. Instead of focusing solely on keeping family peace, she began paying closer attention to her own emotional needs. She started evaluating relationships through a different lens, asking herself whether those connections were healthy, supportive, and beneficial to her well-being. The answers were not always easy to accept. Katie explained that some relationships continued patterns that reminded her of the trauma she had experienced growing up. In certain situations, she felt that old wounds were being reopened rather than healed. This forced her to make difficult decisions about who would remain in her life moving forward. For many people, family relationships carry a unique emotional weight. Society often teaches that family bonds should be preserved at all costs. Katie acknowledged that this belief made her decisions even more painful. She struggled with feelings of responsibility and wondered whether creating distance would be viewed as selfish or unforgiving. Yet she eventually came to understand that protecting her mental health was not an act of cruelty. Instead, it was an act of self-preservation. According to Katie, setting boundaries became one of the most important tools in her healing journey. Boundaries allowed her to define what behavior she would accept and what behavior she could no longer tolerate. While some family members respected those boundaries, others reportedly did not respond positively. As a result, relationships began to fade or end altogether. Katie described how heartbreaking it was to watch family connections disappear one after another. Some relatives stopped communicating. Others drifted away naturally as tensions increased. There were also relationships that ended because both sides simply could not find common ground. The emotional toll was significant. She admitted that losing so many family members created periods of loneliness. There were moments when she questioned whether the sacrifices were worth it. Watching holidays, birthdays, and family gatherings pass without certain loved ones was incredibly painful. Each missed milestone served as a reminder of the distance that now existed. At the same time, Katie began noticing positive changes in her life. As she surrounded herself with healthier relationships, she felt stronger emotionally. The constant stress and anxiety that had once dominated her life slowly began to lessen. She found herself gaining confidence and developing a clearer understanding of her own worth. One of the most important lessons she learned was that family is not always defined solely by blood. Over time, she built meaningful relationships with people who supported her, respected her boundaries, and encouraged her healing. These connections helped fill some of the gaps left behind by the family relationships she had lost. Still, Katie made it clear that the pain never completely disappeared. Even when someone knows they made the right decision, the loss of family can leave a lasting ache. She continues to carry both sadness and acceptance as part of her journey. As her story unfolded further, Katie began discussing how therapy, self-reflection, and personal growth played major roles in helping her rebuild her life after losing nearly 90% of her family relationships. One of the most significant factors in Katie Bates Clark's healing journey was her commitment to personal growth. After years of carrying the emotional weight of childhood trauma, she realized that recovery would require more than simply creating distance from painful relationships. It would require learning how to understand herself, process her experiences, and build a healthier future. Katie explained that healing is often much harder than people realize. Many assume that once someone leaves a toxic situation, the pain immediately disappears. In reality, the emotional effects of trauma can remain for years. Fear, self-doubt, anxiety, and feelings of rejection often continue long after the original circumstances have changed. For Katie, confronting those emotions became an essential part of moving forward. She began spending time reflecting on how her childhood experiences had shaped her beliefs about herself and others. This process was not always comfortable. Looking back at painful memories often brought difficult emotions to the surface. There were moments when she felt overwhelmed by sadness, anger, or disappointment. Yet she continued the work because she believed healing required honesty. Katie also spoke about the importance of seeking support. Whether through counseling, trusted friends, mentors, or loved ones, she learned that recovery becomes more manageable when people do not have to face it alone. Having individuals who listened without judgment gave her the strength to keep moving forward during some of the most challenging periods of her life. As she worked through her trauma, Katie began recognizing patterns that had followed her into adulthood. Certain fears, reactions, and relationship habits suddenly made more sense when viewed through the lens of her childhood experiences. Understanding these patterns allowed her to make intentional changes instead of repeating cycles that no longer served her. Another important lesson involved learning self-worth. Many trauma survivors struggle with feelings of inadequacy or the belief that they must constantly earn love and acceptance. Katie admitted that overcoming these thoughts took time. Gradually, she began understanding that her value was not determined by other people's opinions, approval, or willingness to remain in her life. That realization became incredibly empowering. Rather than focusing on the relationship she had lost, Katie started paying more attention to the life she was creating. She invested energy into healthy connections, personal goals, and experiences that brought peace and fulfillment. Little by little, she began building a future that felt very different from the painful past she had spent years trying to escape. She also emphasized that healing does not mean forgetting. The trauma she experienced remains a part of her story, and the loss of so many family relationships continues to affect her. However, she no longer sees those experiences as something that controls her life. Instead, she views them as chapters that helped shape her strength, resilience, and understanding of herself. Katie's willingness to discuss these struggles publicly has resonated with many people who have faced similar situations. Countless individuals understand what it feels like to love family members, while also recognizing that certain relationships may be harmful. Her story serves as a reminder that setting boundaries can be painful, but sometimes necessary for personal well-being. At the same time, she acknowledges that every situation is unique. There is no single formula for healing from trauma or navigating complicated family dynamics. Each person must determine what is healthiest for their own circumstances. Today, Katie appears focused on continuing her growth, while remaining open about both the victories and challenges she has experienced along the way. Her journey has been marked by loss, heartbreak, difficult decisions, and emotional healing. But perhaps the most powerful part of her story is what happened after those relationships ended, and how she ultimately found a new sense of peace, despite losing nearly 90% of her family connections. In reflecting on everything she has experienced, Katie Bates Clark made it clear that her story is not only about loss. While losing nearly 90% of her family relationships was one of the most painful chapters of her life, she believes the experience also taught her lessons about resilience, healing, and personal strength that she may never have learned otherwise. Looking back, Katie acknowledged that there were times when she felt completely overwhelmed by the weight of her circumstances. The combination of childhood trauma and fractured family relationships created emotional challenges that seemed impossible to overcome. There were moments of grief, loneliness, and uncertainty when she questioned what her future would look like. Yet, despite those struggles, she kept moving forward. Over time, Katie began focusing less on what had been taken from her and more on what she was building for herself. Instead of allowing the pain of the past to define her identity, she chose to invest in her emotional well-being and create a healthier environment for her future. That shift in perspective became a major turning point in her journey. She explained that healing is not about pretending the trauma never happened. It is about learning how to live a full and meaningful life despite what happened. The memories may remain, and certain wounds may never completely disappear, but they no longer have to control every decision or relationship. One of the most meaningful discoveries Katie made was that support can come from unexpected places. While many family relationships were lost, she found comfort in the people who stood beside her during difficult times. Friends, loved ones, and trusted supporters became important sources of encouragement and stability. Those relationships reminded her that genuine love and respect are built through actions, not simply through family ties. Katie also stressed that choosing peace does not mean giving up on compassion. She continues to hope for understanding and healing wherever possible, but she has learned that protecting her mental and emotional health must remain a priority. That balance between compassion and self-preservation has become a key part of how she approaches life today. Her openness has resonated with many people because family estrangement remains a topic that is often misunderstood. Those who have never experienced it may assume the decision is easy or made impulsively. Katie's story highlights the reality that such choices are usually the result of years of pain, reflection, and difficult circumstances. For others who have faced childhood trauma, her message carries a sense of hope. She wants people to know that healing is possible, even when the path feels overwhelming. Progress may be slow, setbacks may occur, and difficult emotions may surface along the way, but growth can still happen. Today, Katie appears determined to continue living with honesty and purpose. Rather than hiding her experiences, she is using them to encourage conversations about trauma, mental health, boundaries, and recovery. By sharing her story, she hopes others will feel less alone in their own struggles. Although the loss of nearly 90% of her family relationships remains a heartbreaking reality, Katie refuses to let that statistic become the defining feature of her life. Instead, she sees herself as someone who survived difficult circumstances, confronted painful truths, and chose healing even when the process required enormous sacrifice. Her journey serves as a powerful reminder that while trauma can shape a person's story, it does not have to determine the ending. And for Katie Bates Clark, the focus now appears to be on building a future, defined not by the pain she endured, but by the strength she discovered while overcoming it.